I do appreciate the opportunity to be here and get to talk about this. I certainly would not claim to speak for a community, but I definitely can share about my experience. I do identify as a transgender person. I have kind of known that I was transgender for, I'd say, about 5.5 years.
Okay.
I grew up at a time when even gay and lesbian representation was very minimal, and I assumed from a fairly young age that because I was attracted to men that made me a gay male. And what ended up happening was after years of therapy and years of wondering why I felt like I was never very good at being a gay male, I started to have the realization that the idea that what I saw on the outside was not how I felt on the inside, and there was a lot of baggage that comes along with that for somebody like me. I come from a very conservative, very traditional background. This is not therapy, but from therapy and from doing some work on myself, I know that I grew up in a safe and secure environment, and it was easy for me to associate safety and security with tradition and conservative values, and to think that anything different of myself would make me feel not as safe and not as secure. So it's only been in the last 5 or 6 years that I guess I've allowed myself to go to a place where this is possible. I have known a lot of trans people who have known that they were trans from a super young age. That is not my story. I can sometimes be a little resentful that there are trans people who got years and years to process who they were and who they are, and to kind of say things to themselves that I think most LGBT people say before they're able to say it to anybody else. So I feel like I've squeezed quite a bit of self-exploration into a relatively short amount of time, but I am grateful for the opportunity to get to live life the way that feels the most genuine for me. It definitely is a transition process. I'm not somebody who has been comfortable calling myself a trans female from the beginning, because I have never wanted to appear or act like I am trying to co-opt an identity that's not mine. And so it has been a process of getting to know me and letting other people get to know me in a way that they haven't gotten to know me before. I do foresee a time when I identify that way as transgender female, but for right now, I think transgender person is what has felt the most comfortable. Being somebody who wasn't comfortable immediately with changing presentation right away made it difficult for people around me to know what box to put me in, and so it seemed difficult for men especially to adjust the way that they would talk to me. So for instance, it's pretty common when men talk to who they assume are other men to use words like man and bro and dude, and I'm sure it's the same for trans men as well with cisgender females. But the point that I had to get to with the language issue was to say, this person may not be intending the words the way they come out, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't affect me in that way.
You feel it. I mean, just
Exactly. And so I guess in my head what it can feel like sometimes, and like I said, I think people do it without realizing that they're doing it, that when words like that are used, that it's almost a way of trying to bring someone into a group that they may not want to be in.
Like guys, like say, come on guys. I mean that's not right.
Right, and I've had to kind of look at the language that I use as well, because that specific phrase is one that I use fairly frequently and has been brought to my attention. And so in the same way that I want other people to be respectful about the words that they use, I got to do the same thing. So, yeah.
And how about pronouns? Is that dead names and all that kind of stuff?
Wow. Pronouns have been a tricky thing for me because, like I said, I have identified as a trans person almost, since I started this process, or at least to myself, identified that way. And so, the words like the gender specific words like man and dude and bro, I always felt comfortable saying, please don't use those with me, because I knew that they could just not use those words without having to identify me as female. Pronouns, on the other hand, are a little bit different. It is hard to speak to people and speak about people without using pronouns, and I know that there are different choices that people make and ask for, like they and them, if they're not comfortable with she or him. And so it has really only been in the last 6-8 months that she and her have started to feel more comfortable than he and him. Awesome. There's definitely still a bit of a little bit of unease with it, but at the beginning, him and he felt uncomfortable, but more comfortable than the other. Right.
Years are used to hearing.
Right. And so as time has gone on, he and him has definitely, I was telling a friend the other day, it has gotten to where my dead name and he and him really do kind of cause a kind of visceral reaction in me. Obviously not intended by the other person, but really a feeling of, you are calling me something that I'm not, and that is not a comfortable thing. So yeah, pronouns have been a challenge for me and for everybody else, I think.
And Brian, first I'd like to ask you, how would you identify yourself?
It's a gay male, black gay male. I say black gay male because there is a difference, I feel, with my race and my culture and being gay also. Just growing up, very briefly, that was something that was a little difficult to even talk about in a community. I grew up in a community of African Americans that was, we weren't dirt poor, but there was not a lot of money around. And those things, as a black young man, you just didn't talk about. And I grew up also in the black church, and it definitely was not to be discussed. Even though it was prevalent, you just didn't talk about it. As I've gotten older, the process has changed from my childhood to, I just turned 58 years old. Yeah.
Well preserved.
Thank you. And I have spent most of my life trying to accept and process my identity with the world that I live in and the environment of my culture.
Is that like the download? Or is that something like for older? Was that like
Well, that would be men who refuse to accept the fact that they have homosexual attractions to other men, and they're living with women and expecting society to accept them. I've been accepting myself for years, so I've never been on the down low per se. I just didn't accept what I was, so I tried to keep it to myself and act as if I was something else.
Can you give me examples of some microaggressions that you faced in your life, just out there dealing with when you're dealing with people in authority, or?
Well, when you get past the trauma of just being called as a child things that you didn't even know what they were, I came home and I would ask my mother and my grandmother, what does that mean? So very early on, I mean 5, 6 years old, first grade, I knew that there was something ugly about me and different about me. And I say ugly about me because the kids in school teased me about that. But then when grandmother said, God doesn't like ugly, I thought, I internalized that it meant so I must be ugly because these feelings I feel inside are not accepted by people on the outside. And so I was teased as a child, not only for my feminine behaviors, but also in the black community for my dark skin.
Oh, wow.
Even in the community that I grew up in, even as a child, I remember that the more fair you were, or the more closer you were to Caucasian, or looking, or lighter skin, and that just came back from centuries and centuries of ignorance.
And oppression.
And oppression, exactly. So, you know, my hair, when I had some, it was very napped. And so my counterpartners who had straighter hair or softer hair, they were categorized as having good hair.
Right.
So now I'm dealing with a double jeopardy. I feel different as a little boy on the inside from just how I see myself, and also I don't feel accepted within my own culture, let alone the culture outside of myself, for the complexion of my skin. So it's been a rough journey for years.
I think you had to go through that.
I identify as a cisgender female pansexual.
Okay.
So, and also bisexual is fine too. The reason I say pansexual is because really gender doesn't come into play with who I fall for. And also, I have been in a relationship with someone who is identified as non-binary.
Yeah.
And so, you know, a lot of people kind of use the term bisexual to mean like yourself or not like yourself, but it's just more comfortable for me to say pan, but bi doesn't
It's like human.
bother me. Yeah. So, you know, I kind of sometimes when I get hit with a microaggression, it's like, what does pansexual even mean? I'm like, well, I enjoy like dating skillets. You know, I joke, you know, I kind of throw it back because I think one of my defenses against microaggressions is humor, and it kind of
The
builds that.
panpipe.
Yeah. I only like the pan flute. And I kind of, you know, my journey on that was, I remember being in high school and someone just asked me out of the blue, when did you know you liked men and women? And I was like, well, I always have. And it became real to me. However, when I went to college, everyone assumed I was a lesbian, and then I got into a relationship with a woman, and then after that was in a 9-year relationship with a woman. So it became, I was able to, like, that kind of self-hiding of, I just went with it because of the fact that it was easy to hide. But things like weird things happen. Like I'd be at college parties and I'd end up making out with a guy.
Yeah.
It's like, what's that all about? Or
Everyone's
I'd date
like,
someone, you know, whereas normally, you know, my friends who, a lot of my friends who came out as lesbian or gay, you'd hear about them going to parties and making out with the same sex. I would like be weirdly making out with the opposite. Or, so anyway, it took me a while down that journey to until I kind of fell for someone who was transitioning from female to non-binary and used they pronouns, and I thought, you know, how can I even say I'm a lesbian if I'm loving someone who doesn't identify as female? What is that to their identity? And that's to me not fair to them. So that's kind of where how I identify. A lot of people just assume that you're either straight or you're lesbian or you're trying to figure it out. So a lot of people are like, when are you going to decide? And that's one thing that came early.
Why does that mean?
You know, when does it decide? You know, I'll decide one today and one tomorrow. I don't know, you know. And then the other part of that is assuming that threesomes are always a part of things, or you date couples, and that's automatically something like, oh, if you like,
Automatically.
if you like more than one gender, then you're. then
Of
that's
course, yeah.
in the air. Then the kind of microaggressions around, well, at least you have double the choices that I do to date, you know, which,
Woody Allen.
well, yeah, which I know because I'm a super like judgmental person, and I probably fall for less people than you would, you know.
Right.
I mean, I know that sounds kind of crazy, but you know, I don't think you choose who you're attracted to, and they're people regardless of gender. It doesn't really expand the number of people. The other thing too is, you know, with dating females specifically, because I'm someone who's always been like very overweight, people have said, well, it must be easier to date females because of the fact that, you know, they're not as worried about appearance. Regarding the idea of dating, you know, people will say, well, you know, when you go out with women, do you play more the man or the woman?
It's very important they know that.
Yeah, right. And I'm like, well, you know, as we're both horizontal, and it doesn't really matter, you know, there's not a role, you know. And again, I kind of deflect a lot of it because it's hard to explain, and
It's not their business. I mean, it's really not.
right. I feel like I've gotten so dead to explaining things regarding what happens in a relationship and why it matters to other people.
So, you know, if you want to just look, you have an audience of social workers out there. If you just tell them something that you would like for them to know working with somebody in your population.
Sure. So, as I think about this question, I work at a health and fitness center, and we had a discussion at our weekly meeting a week or so ago where a couple had come in to join our gym, and the salesperson was not easily able to identify one of the two people as male or female. And so there was some question about what locker room key do we offer this person without knowing. And the salesperson brought it up in our meeting and said, you know, that she was very respectful and said she wanted to make sure that she gave this person the locker key that they wanted, and my company is very progressive with that, and I very much appreciate it. And this person did specify that they wanted a male locker room key. And
Awkward conversation.
Right, and the question was, you know, how do you go about asking a question like that? And there was a lot of talk of, you know, well, what if the person is not trans, and what if they're, and they did ask me kind of what I thought and what my preference would be, and I said, I know that for me, what I would want is I would want somebody to ask me if they didn't know, I would want somebody to ask me the question once and then to not ask me again.
Right.
So in our case, we
Go ahead
have
and do it. Go
do
get
it.
it over with.
And you know, I would much rather have somebody ask than to be misgendered because of what I look like or what I sound like.
I think what would be important for me, if I were to be helped, it's a little late in the game because I've had to kind of figure out a lot of this on my own, but I think that a young person trying to struggle with their sexuality, I really think that really the best thing that you can do is hear them and not stereotype them and put them in a box and say that all gay guys like this or do that or feminine or prissy. Or I have counterparts that are gay who do things completely different from me. I do like football. I do like certain things that I was told that, why do you like that? I thought you were gay. And so I really think if you don't put them in what you perceive to be their sexuality and allow them to express who they are actually to you, I think that's just let them do the work. The other thing I want to say that I think is really, really important is my sexuality and the lack of acceptance outside of me, I needed to be nurtured. And many years of trying to seek that caused some internal anguish, and I turned to drugs and alcohol to comfort me in that because it was the only place that I could numb myself up enough that I didn't even have to feel it. And also it made me feel accepted by society because I felt like the rest of my little buddies, even though I felt very adversely different on the inside. But when I used drugs, it just didn't matter because I could find some acceptance with that. And I think it's really important to recognize that a person who's just discovering their sexuality, like if people think it's hard for them, my grandmother, my family, and everybody would say, what is this going to look like in the church? What is this going to look like with the neighborhood? What are your cousins going to think? Well, nobody asked me what I felt. And it's really important that someone be on my team too.
I think really one of the most important things, and I think this goes, I guess it's easy for me to speak more from just the LGBTQI whatever spectrum, is that firstly, if it's a question that's inappropriate for someone in your own community, it's inappropriate for someone in another community.
Okay.
If you're asking someone about their bedroom or what parts they have or enjoy, then that's never helpful.
Makes
Not that I
sense.
would expect social workers to do that, but when you start, but in asking the questions, I think it's also very important to ask people how they want to be treated or identified, or and that we are all different. Like there are people I know who identify as pansexual who really haven't had that many friends in the LGBT community. They just have a feeling. And then there are friends I know who have long histories and bars and activism and have a whole different view of it. So I think one of the most dangerous things is thinking, oh, I have this one friend once who I knew was also pansexual, and this is how they feel, so this is how you must feel too. So I think just being open and realizing that it's always safer to ask questions and listen versus trying to identify by relating with your own experience instead of asking someone their experience.